Welcome to Solved, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Collectively, we produce the venerable, indispensable, not to mention award-winning Best of the Left podcast launched in 2006, where humans, that's us, curate progressive media on a chosen topic, creating episodes that are greater than the sum of their parts. So if you don't already know, now you know, and you should check that out. On this show, we use those same curation skills to pull together stories and ideas that help us solve some of society's biggest problems. Today on Solved, we'll be looking at the relatively unique history of the original Pilgrims and how their culture continues to influence us today, including the magical thinking of strong men saviors who can swoop in and make everything right. In contrast, we'll also discuss one of FDR's lesser-known inspiring quotes, which invokes the metaphor of beating children with a stick, which might explain why it's not as widely known as some others. Who are the adults in this metaphor? Who are the children? Stay tuned to find out. Well, we start with Donald Trump's America echoes our Puritan past. This is Vanity Fair, and they explain way before the founding of the country, there was the European contact in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in a way that we don't often discuss it. So it says, in many ways, the United States was founded by what current Americans might call a cult. The Puritans were a radical, high-control group with doomsday beliefs, a fact we rarely acknowledge. The group's apocalyptic ideology never left us, but became a foundation of American culture. And then arguing that many today are, quote, a populace that craves an autocratic punisher, openly worships the wealthy, and easily succumbs to us versus them thinking, just as the Puritans and Pilgrims did. And then later in the article points out, us versus them thinking is a hallmark of not only Puritan thought, but also all cult-like movements. So once again, the seeds of our country being reframed in ways we don't often talk about. The last note that I'll leave this introduction with is a description of a story that apparently the Puritans loved. And it was the story of this Eden-like community being threatened by some evil. Law enforcement and government were powerless or unwilling to stop it. And an outsider arrived to rescue the community. And if that sounds familiar, it's because that storyline has just followed through entirely. It became the Western genre and comic books and undergirds basically all superhero films today. Deon, as our resident nerd, how do you feel about your love of superheroes being reframed in this way?
I think it's accurate, honestly. Like there's a lot of conversation in nerd world about specifically the damage that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done and seeding the way for fascism, because there are these special people that will take care of everything and you don't have to do anything. They'll take care of it. There's good, there's evil. It's very defined. I think as a way of telling stories, it's pretty simple. It produces good stories, but as a cultural ideal, and that's kind of what Marvel has become, it is not great. And I think we're kind of seeing that people that vote for Democrats are expecting someone to be the savior or someone to come and fix this new problem. And there isn't a savior coming, because that's not how human life works. We all need to collectively work together to solve problems. Whereas on the Republican side, they've decided Trump is their savior. He is punishing the villains. And that's why people can see stories of hairdressers from Venezuela being shipped to El Salvadorian gang prisons and be okay with it because, well, he must be bad because the good guy said he was bad.
Just to complicate this a touch, as we were talking, I was thinking about Westerns, like traditional Western movies. And that dynamic is almost similar, but on the flip side, it's like an evil person comes from outside and the single local hero defends for the community. So it's similar, but it's just a little different because the one savior is already part of the community and a local pride and joy, the sheriff, usually.
So the argument goes that this story framing, the superhero story framing, is sort of subconsciously encouraging people to forego the messiness of democracy, because if you don't have democracy, well, then you can have this other person come in, this hero with unchecked power, who will be able to act much more efficiently. They'll be able to take care of the problems much easier because bureaucracy probably is a problem, or democracy is too slow, or people I disagree with are the problem. And so the foundations of the desire for, whether it be like God will come down and judge us and that'll be nice and clean and easy, or, well, okay, in human society, let's just have some powerful person do it for us, is, I mean, I think none of us are going to be in favor of that, but you can sort of understand the draw, right? You can understand, well, if possible, that would be nice. It's not possible. It's totally not possible. And anyone saying that they're the person to save you is definitely a grifter, and they are going to take you for everything you and your community are worth. That's how the real world works. But yeah, the dream of the hero is appealing. Like, I can at least grant people that much.
I alone can fix it.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, authoritarianism didn't happen here overnight. And as the president has wielded more executive power, I would say Obama on, but probably even before that, they started using that executive power differently. That people are okay with that. Like that kind of goes to the figurehead, like when things are going wrong in the country, blame the president. Like it is one person's fault. And it's also one person who can save. I think a lot of political figures fall in that when they're running, where they don't have honest conversations about it's going to take all of us. This is what it's going to look like. I think Obama kind of channeled a little bit like we all have to work. This isn't going to happen overnight. But I think by and large, it's very much like, I'm going to go in there. These are what I'm going to accomplish, and your life is going to be better for it. Yeah, I guess that would be great if that ever could happen.
In this article, it also mentions that the idea that someone has merit and is worth being in charge is, if you work hard, you have more money so that your bank account will show that you are valuable. You are someone who is favored by God.
Yeah, God loves you.
God loves you. So if you don't have that, then God doesn't love you. Then you kind of deserve what you get. You can see that in, I don't know if this is explicitly what RFK thinks, if it is connected to religion, but the way recently just kind of gutted the NIH, CDC, we're going to see some serious consequences from pandemics, from people just getting sick and dying. But there's going to be this idea that the people that got sick and died deserved it. This kind of religious idea behind it that, well, they weren't working hard enough. They weren't healthy enough. They were doing something wrong, or they were just cursed. And I don't know that RFK necessarily believes that, but like Jamel Bowie, writer for the New York Times, recently said, all of this stuff that RFK is doing makes sense if you think of it with the context of he is a eugenicist, and eugenics has religious underpinnings. Like, we've got to get rid of the weak, the ones who are not favored by God. And I mean, we're seeing it manifest in a different way. They're not wearing funny buckles on their hats, but it's the same ideology playing out in a modern context.
Which brings us to a point in the article that reminded me of something my brother said to me a few weeks ago, that any society that is based on the idea that money is the most important thing is doomed to fail. In essence, I would say that valuing money in that way is just simply not actually aligned with deep human values, which explains why following that path is destined to fail. But defenders of capitalism have argued exactly the opposite, saying that human values can be quantified exactly by how people choose to spend their money. And that absolutely harkens back to exactly kind of how the Puritans felt about it. So it says, we've arrived at this sad state of affairs because our Puritan roots have primed us to equate the number in a person's bank account with their moral character. The Pilgrims and Puritans deemed hard work a foundational way to glorify God. Okay, so far. Since money is a natural outcome of hard work, striving for wealth itself eventually became expected. The richer you got, the more evidence that you loved God, and the more he rewarded you in turn. Oh, shit.
Yeah.
And that has totally screwed us. And all of that, I mean, it reminded me of something from, I think just last week, it was the article about some liberals admitting that Bernie and AOC are more right than they have been. And a quote from that article says, liberal disdain has long manifested in skepticism of student loan forgiveness, hostility toward Medicare for all, and contempt for warnings that offshoring and dismantling manufacturing would create problems that no pair of $3 boxer shorts from Walmart could offset. And even these left of center-ish people fall prey to that same basic line of thinking that money equates to morality.
Godliness.
And so they really, really don't like to help poor people because they're probably not actually moral and don't deserve it. And you can draw a straight line all the way back.
And there's been this thing that's kind of bothered me for a long time that I really didn't understand about the way that people just broadly think of the hyper rich. The way that Elon and all those types are talked about is that they work hard, that they're working so hard that they earn this, which is clearly not true. It's very obvious that they're not working any harder. Like their money is making money for them. That's not working harder. But culturally, the idea that because they have this money, they must be working is just in society. It's embedded in just the way we think. So it's this natural outgrowth of that. Well, if they're that rich, they must have worked hard, not taking into account any of the advantages of being born rich, all the things. But you can explain that away religiously too, because they must be favored by God at some point. If you can't explain it through work, well, God gave it to them.
Mm-hmm. And actually, before the show was on YouTube, we did a whole episode about the Puritan work ethic and dove pretty deep into that. And it's a structure that we definitely still talk about and think about today. And it makes it really, really easy to just devalue anybody who's poor and therefore say, like, it's all their fault. We don't need to address this. This isn't a systemic issue in our society that we need to fix. It's a personal, individual problem. They didn't work hard enough. Therefore, why should I have to use my tax dollars to lift them up in any way? And it just absolves all of that responsibility from the society at large that has let people slip through the cracks without any sort of safety net and go on your merry way without having any feelings about it whatsoever. And the work requirement for some of our welfare programs is a great example of this. It's an assumption that anybody who doesn't have a job isn't even worth the assistance. So make it harder, make the bar higher, and quote unquote, like teach them a lesson is really what the underlying message of that program is.
Reading about this Puritan ideology and stuff just like reaffirms why I'm not religious. And like working on the last episode on Christian nationalism, there was a clip that was comparing atheists to Christians. And a lot of what I found was that atheists are more willing to help people. They're more open to people coming into the country, like diversity being a asset. Whereas Christians, it's like the complete opposite of the spectrum, which is so wild because most of these people are screaming about Jesus, not about God, but about Jesus, who is the socialist. I mean, God is spiteful. God is the one that you should be afraid of. Like he is the one that you should be summoning on Sunday when you're, spitting this venom for your congregation, right? But it's Jesus. And like now that I've looked, I've read about it, but to me, I can't. Like, I don't understand what I'm missing. That it's Jesus that these people are referencing. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And, if it wasn't bad enough already, the article points to yet another outcome of this social dynamic that was in place with the Puritans and has sort of reasserted itself today. And it says, when in groups are pitted against out groups, both become isolated. Isolated groups inevitably trend toward violence, the result of losing social feedback, suffering from groupthink, and becoming prone to shared psychosis. And then it goes on to have this, it's a little bit of analysis of how the Salem witch trials came to be. And this is not this writer's own analysis. It says some scholars believe that the Salem witch trials of 1692 and 1693 developed specifically in response to strict and isolating patriarchal structures. And it goes on to say that the timing of it is actually right at the end of the Puritans being isolated, right before they became forcibly integrated with the rest of the British colonists. Eventually, they just sort of integrated into the rest of society. So they weren't as isolated as they had been before. So the timing of the witch trials, like the peak of the psychosis of that community, happened right at the end of their isolation. If they had continued to be isolated, it's certainly possible the psychosis could have continued, but that is interesting analysis. And what that means for today, with so many communities being isolated in their media bubbles, not subject to social feedback, suffering from groupthink, and on, it could very well go a long way to explaining the dynamics we're seeing today.
And it was a power grab. It was sort of a last flailing, desperate attempt for ultimate control before they lost that ultimate control. And that's also what we're seeing at the political level, that there's a belief that they've been injured and that they're losing the grip on society. And so it's a flail to lock shit down, right? Like that's what they want to do. And so that actually resonated very strongly with me. I was like, oh, okay. Because people have been talking about it like a last gasp, this whole authoritarianist turn. But it is so much more about feeling that everything's slipping away and you have one more chance. Like, this is it. So you better go for it with everything you got.
Yeah, the article ends on that point. Basically, it says, as America trends ever closer to autocracy and exhibits more and more hallmarks of high control groups, including violent acts against its own members, you have to wonder, is our own experiment reaching its conclusion? End quote. But the note I wrote was, which experiment are we ending? We hope we're not ending the experiment of democracy. We hope we're ending the experiment of patriarchy and closed groups, that it's going to go so badly and implode so ferociously that we will have to pivot back to something that actually functions.
Because I am in a media bubble, just like everybody is to a certain extent. I haven't been on Twitter, X in quite some time. I think most people that are listening to this aren't really on it. If you ever get an opportunity to see some of the things that are written on there, it's like a foreign language at this point. And I found that not as much with Fox, because I'm kind of in the world of having to pay attention to what Fox News is saying. But if you take a break from Fox News for a while and don't see any clips and you come back, the storylines are very difficult to follow. Don't know what they're talking about. They're angry at somebody. I know that they're always angry at somebody. That's the most important part of
Always.
all of it. That's the through line. There needs to be someone that suffers the consequences of the world not being exactly as they need it to be. But it is this illusion of control, this need to feel control in a world that it is an illusion. It's not real. Like, I was having a conversation with my daughter the other day about, she's got a friend who has step brothers and sisters. And why does she have step brothers and sisters? Because her parents got divorced. And I explained to her that mommy and daddy are not going to get divorced. Like, we have worked through things and discussed and know how to argue, and I think we'll be fine. But I can't guarantee that nothing will happen, because she also has a friend whose father died in a car accident. So I cannot tell her that that is something that won't happen. I could lie to her, but I'm not going to. But there's only so much you can control. And the idea that you can control everything, I think, leads to these fantasies of power, needing for the world to have some sort of structure and order that it honestly just doesn't have. And
Yeah.
it is nice to have, structure and routine in your life, but it doesn't mean the world will do exactly what you want it to do. And it doesn't mean that everything will turn out the way you want it to. But I think a lot of people need it to feel that way. And that's how they end up supporting someone who says he alone can fix it.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what we're dealing with right now is out of fear of death, fear of others, fear of your own safety. I mean, it's so many categories of fear. And yeah, it's tough to be a human. Like, I get that. We all feel that for sure. But to what degree do you think you actually can change the chaotic world we live in? I think conservatives just have a much more flaily response to that fear.
Well, I also think like religion is a little bit of a product of fear. If you think about it, like once science got to a certain point, you think it would have gave way and we would have transitioned and you would see religion being less popular. One of the thoughts I had the other day is like, it's hard to imagine a woman president, but it's even harder to imagine an atheist president. That's just not something that, seems very plausible, but that seems so weird to me that we're, quote, this advanced and we still lean on it so hard. But all of these kind of are arms of this capitalist world that we're under. So I see this Christianity and this fear and this like promise of better things to come, like being able to hold off for that great world that essentially we could all make happen right now. The same with education. I think part of our education is teaching us or not teaching us the intricacies of thoughts and philosophy and these other things. It's more like labor, it's more transactional education. So all of these are arms of capitalism. And under all of that, I think it's created people who are super afraid, like afraid of everything. And honestly, when you're in an economic situation like of instability, living paycheck to paycheck, of course you're afraid of so many things that why not also, like God, absolutely. Like I'll be a little fearful of God, I'm afraid of my boss. I'm afraid of all of these things that I don't have power in, as, Deon was talking about.
I think we do have an atheist president right now, and it's ironic that he's been turned into the most religious icon of a president we've ever had, but also doesn't believe a fucking thing.
I
was going to say, it's going to be just like the first openly gay representative, the first openly trans. We're just going to have the first openly atheist president,
right? Yeah, I mean, they freaked out that JFK was a Catholic, so who knows what's possible. No, I know it's different. Believe me.
Well, next up, you really set us up perfectly, Erin, because the combination of the fear and powerlessness that comes with both Christianity and capitalism are encapsulated in the Mother Jones article, How Musk, Trump, and Your Boss Learned to Hate Democracy. And beyond Erin's perfect setup for this portion of the conversation, I realized that today's conversation is actually sitting directly between the two episodes of Best of Left that are in production currently. Erin just worked on an episode about Christian nationalism, and Deon's tech bros who are trying to bring forth the techno-feudalism and hate democracy in the process. It's like exactly the world in which we're discussing. It was sort of unintentional that it worked out this way, but it was nice. So this article I found frustrating in the way that something becomes clarified for you and then you're retrospectively angry that it took you this long to have that clarity. So it says, once we grasp that the default constitution of the capitalist workplace is a dictatorship, that the business class feels that it's infinitely superior to government workers, that they think they could clean things up and make things way more efficient by running government as a business, we realize what they're essentially saying is we gotta run government like a dictatorship, a place where the boss rules. And I have been hearing the idea from conservatives and progressives criticizing it for at least 20 years, the idea that government should be run like a business. And I cannot believe that neither I nor anyone I have ever heard talk about this made the connection that what they really mean is that businesses are run like dictatorships. And when we say government should be run like a business, that's what we mean. And I found that very frustrating.
Now that's more of a mainstream. I mean, this is why you're hearing about it now, right? That's just much more of a mainstream thought, especially from Silicon Valley, who are a bunch of libertarians and have been infiltrated by some very fringe thinkers and mixed it all together like a soup. And so now they're just less hesitant about talking about it this way. It's hitting the mainstream.
So, as part of research for the episode I'm working on, I actually listened to an interview with Curtis Yarvin, the
I heard
thought
the same
lead.
one, Deon.
Yeah, the thought leader behind all this. I think he's mentioned in the article too. He said this almost explicitly that wouldn't the government of California work better if it was run by Apple, and Apple famously had companies that had to put nets up because people were trying to jump off buildings to kill themselves in their factories that are offshored, not here, but in China. And that's their idea of efficiency. The word they use over and over again, efficiency, because that's an easier way to say make money for me and who cares who suffers. And that's what they want. That's what they've wanted this whole time. He says regularly people need to get over their idea of dictatorship. It's not inherently bad. He said in that interview, the monarchy, it's a neutral concept. It's not good or bad. Bullshit. We all agree. Monarchy is bad. Like we agree. That's as American as I'll get right now.
That's
like,
the founding of the whole idea.
No kings. We agreed. No kings. However, in practice, we haven't actually done that. We have lords and ladies all over this place. We have dukes and duchesses running all kinds of things. And that's the next frontier. But that's also when people start to make those connections, like Martin Luther King, he didn't get killed necessarily for his beliefs about civil rights. Generally, he died at a poor people's protest, like when he's trying to get all people together to realize that it's not just black versus white, it's not black brown, it's not race as much as class. And when people start to realize that, the pushback it can get violent. We've seen that throughout history.
I mean, this is part of the reason they want to remove the idea of race as an invented construct from our museums. And that is a beneficial thing to wipe away, even though there is pretty mass consensus that is an actual fact, that it was invented and created for a purpose to divide people. And if we could just get rid of that, then we don't really have to worry about any of that silliness, that wokeness. We can just continue on with our plans. I also listened to that interview, and the thing that struck me the most was how badly that guy tries to argue his point. He is so bad at it, and that made me happy, at least. But the journalist could have gone harder to really explain how badly he was arguing that point. But the one that really blew my mind is when he talked about Apple, he acts like it's Tim Cook and the buck stops there, and there's no other checks and balances, no other larger context to consider. Corporations have boards. They have customers. they have employees who can unionize. Like there are all sorts of other levers there. Can they still be assholes? Can they still treat their workers like shit? Can they still do like monarchical things and make monarchical decisions? Sure. But there is a line. And the idea that he's holding up corporations as the epitome of how a monarchy should run, just like, I mean, it made me laugh, honestly. I was like, that's not quite how it works. That's how Elon Musk runs Twitter, or did run Twitter. He wants to be the only guy. And then everything goes down from there. But that's actually not how most corporations, big names in our stock market, function.
Just to quickly defend Curtis Yarvin for being bad at arguing his points.
Oh, good Lord.
I just want to highlight that his argument is bad because the ideas are bad.
Yeah.
No one could argue that monarchy is a good thing well, because it's such a stupid idea that, you know, that's where he went wrong. Libertarianism came up, and I found in this article, like, it's a great clarification of libertarianism, that the general idea of it is like people who just want freedom and get the government off my back. And progressives tends to think that libertarians are right about half the time. The other half, they're completely off the deep end. But this article sort of clarifies that those people in Silicon Valley calling themselves libertarians does a disservice to libertarians, or it clarifies what libertarianism really is, depending on your argument. So they talk about Mark Andreessen. You know, he used to be a Democratic Party promoter or supporter or funder, and he's pivoted, and now he's a big Trump guy. And he talks about when he was radicalized. And it turns out it wasn't like in the last couple of years. He says that it was around 2012 because of all the annoying kids working for him. And the article goes on to explain that these people in Silicon Valley, they got rich because they founded companies that required the hiring of lots and lots of extremely intelligent people who were very skilled, and those people needed to be given a lot of power and sway within the company so that they could use their skills to make the founders billions and billions of dollars. And then when those people became billionaires, the switch flipped, right? And they thought, well, look at me. I'm a billionaire. I'm basically Superman. Why aren't all these people respecting me for what a genius I am? All these pesky kids are still having opinions, and they're not showing the proper amount of respect to me by shutting up and doing exactly what I say all of the time. And so the idea of the libertarian as this just like freedom loving person who's against government constraints is not really an accurate description of these guys. They're not so much about freedom as they are about impunity. They just want to do what they want to do with no constraints, no input from anyone ever. And that is what clarifies the connection between these Silicon Valley billionaires who like traditionally have been kind of on the left-ish and like, well, you know, like pro whatever marijuana and gay rights and things like that. And so many of them are now flipping to authoritarian Trumpism. And it's because authoritarianism, if you're on the side of the authoritarian, or you think you are, that is the path to impunity, as Trump is demonstrating. Anyone who supports Trump can have absolute immunity from consequences for any horrible thing they do. That's the idea. That's how he gains support from people who are looking for that kind of impunity.
And that's what the H-1B visa argument is about. They do realize they still need talented, smart people to work for them, but they need more leverage. And that's why they want to get rid of people who have some autonomy and ability to move between jobs and have more to hold over these people. It's the exact same people, except they're foreign and they can be deported at any time. And that's why the first lever that's being pulled right now is deportations for this administration, we will un-American you. We will exile
Yep.
you. We will make you as other as possible. You won't even be around us. And that's what the Silicon Valley bros want to use too. But they also still want to exploit their workers, but
Yeah.
more exploitative.
This article was great at just like crystallizing a bunch of things that but it's so much more clear now. Atlas Shrugged, which I have not read, but I know the deal. Let's put it that way, is so perfect. Like it makes so much sense to me why these Silicon Valley CEOs like found libertarianism and were like, oh, finally, like someone gets it. Like that's totally who she was talking to. And so in Atlas Shrugged, it says in the article, Rand's idea of freedom was that smart people like John Galt and Atlas Shrugged were screwed by rules and restrictions on the talented. And so we need free people like him and other brilliant CEOs to do whatever they want. The key is not empathy, but empowering the right people. And whatever happens to other people, so be it. And this also does explain how, and I don't think we talk about this enough, like the Republican Party, they're basically libertarians now. That was sort of a part of that party for a long time. Rand Paul and his father, like they were kind of this wing of the right wing. That has fully integrated into the Republican Party. And then with the addition of all of the Silicon Valley rich guys, tech bros coming into the fold, having already embraced libertarianism, it was a perfect storm. And so the Republican Party had no defenses against a pure libertarian ideology taking over the party. And that is where we are right now. Like the Republican Party is not, they haven't been the party of your grandparents in a long time, but like they are libertarians. They are not Republicans. Like the idea of what the Republican Party stood for is like George H.W. Bush. Like it's not what's happening now. This is libertarianism. This is a free-for-all, destroy the government, make sure the rich people get what they need, totally strip regulations from everything. Like that is a libertarian fever dream. That is what we're living in.
I like this culture that happens. Speaking of stripping our government away, one of the fun things, I'm in the nonprofit world and we do a lot of foundational grants. And the new thing that's happened is a lot of the requirements, a lot of what they're looking for has altered under this administration. So initiatives centering equity, centering diversity, anything like that, pretty much gone from a lot of these foundation websites. Now, the word that you see over and over again is innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about it and I was like, what is this code word? Like, what is this that's seeping in? We had a meeting with Amazon. It's the same thing. They want innovation. They want innovative projects. And I thought about like, it is not exciting to pay bills. It is not exciting to keep the lights on, to make sure that people are getting their paycheck. That's not a good pitch. And like part of me looking at them stripping away the government is, like none of this quote is fun. Elon Musk has such his like bro projects of like, oh yeah, we're going to fucking Mars and like, how cool is this? We're innovative. We're like really going, but like making sure people are fed, like not important.
The culture of disruption is way more important than any of that.
Yeah. And every time I'm reading things like this, the words that keep coming back to me is like social contract. Part of, the defunding in our education, not looking at philosophy, arts, and like critical thinking is like part of what is government for? What is the social contract? And like, what do you want for your other citizens? Because like people can tell you what they want for themselves. But like, I think it is a lot harder to have a conversation of what do you want for your neighbors? Mm-hmm. And like, maybe not to be all feely.
Be feely. Maybe don't be ashamed of it.
I'm like, maybe that's what we need to get away from this mindset of innovation and business and like just like simple things of what we want for our neighbors. And honestly, that comes back to the boring things of shelter, of food, of security. Like it might be boring, but it's a lot better for society.
And just to push back just a little bit on the idea that we live in a libertarian country. Also, we're about to do massive tariffs and no competition for Tesla with other electric companies outside of America.
Sure. There's contradictions all over the place.
Yeah, they don't actually believe in that. But they believe that they should be in charge. Fundamentally, that's what they believe.
All I know really to the core about libertarianism is they're full of contradictions. So,
Yeah.
so maybe that's exactly exactly right.
Yeah, maybe it is fully a libertarian country because
Yeah.
And this word innovation, I love that buzzword. Have you gotten a new phone anytime in the last few years? I recently got another phone. And it's, I got a refurbished phone. I'm never buying a new phone again. But I got a refurbished phone, which was 4 years advanced from the phone I had because my battery just finally said no more. It's the same phone. It's exactly the same phone. The innovation that has been done is that they got to charge me more for the same phone with different lens shapes, I think. Innovation.
Yeah. They reinvented the camera.
Yeah.
And they've just now about gotten to the point where it matches the cameras we all used to have. So yay, good for you.
I mean, it's innovative to swindle more money out of people. Like, yeah.
The last point I wanted to make about, from a few minutes ago, we were talking about government being run like a corporation. And we already highlighted that corporations are not actually dictatorships. That's not actually a good comparison. There are more restraints on corporations, not as many as government, but the most important constraint on corporations is not being a monopoly. Now, some corporations do become monopolies, and they're terrible. That's the whole problem with monopolies, is that they are run terribly because they don't need to be better. When you're a monopoly, you don't have to try to get better. Governments, by their nature, are monopolies. Most, like none of us, and most of the people listening don't need to be convinced that government doesn't need to be run like a corporation. But just to put the argument out there, let's say you're sort of enticed by the idea of government being run like a corporation. You're not going to have a governmental corporation that gets run like Apple, which is held up by Curtis Yarvin as like, wouldn't it be great if California was run by Apple? You'd end up with a government run by a bloated, stodgy monopoly that has no incentive to function well. So even your comparison on your own terms completely breaks down. So granted that government is a monopoly and there's no way around that, you can't live in a society and then think like, well, I don't like the set of laws that have come down from this government that I'm living under. Maybe I'll try this other government that I can also live under and abide by a different set of laws. That's how competition would work. Cannot happen in government at all. So given that government is fundamentally a monopoly and there's no way around it, operating as a corporation is a terrible idea. The only way to have a functional government that doesn't get bogged down and stodgy and has no reason or incentive to improve itself is to have a robust and functioning democracy. That's the only way to make society work.
Yeah, and of course, this is why they are now getting into the idea of a network state. So they're looking for other ideas. And if we can all just have our little islands of countries put together by networks and computers, then that solves a lot of those problems, huh? Like just completely eliminate a centralized government. And
will it be on the blockchain? I've heard good things about the blockchain.
Probably.
That might be exciting.
Thinking about the qualities of these people and like how they get into these mind frames. And by these people, I mean ones that have the ability to extract so much from other people and not feel bad about it. I do think we don't discuss enough what personality traits and what qualities make someone able to rise. Like we associate it with intelligence. In the last article, we talked about godliness, all those things that we associate with money. We don't associate like, you have to be a specific kind of person to be able to do that to others. Like no one has made billions without causing devastation.
Mm-hmm.
And like, is that what we want to model? Is that what we want to agree to one another, that we're going to approach things as if we're people who are going to all behave in that way? Because I mean, I imagine if we're going to run like a business, right, then people naturally are going to get more callous towards one another, more cutthroat. And that sounds scary. Like that is not what I want for my neighbors. That's not what I want for my community. I don't think those are good people. I think those should be the subset that we use as examples of what happens when you aren't socially, emotionally developed, or, like whatever you want to, chuck it up to.
Yeah, and that's why Zuckerberg made his stupid comment about the feminization of corporations and like all of that, because the movement towards teams and realizing we're stronger when we work together and all of that, even though that has reaped a lot more profit, it's, at least that's the studies that I've seen and the data I've seen, we don't like that now because we can't be in complete and utter control because they want to be the kings on top of the castle. And the other piece of this article, and Erin, I think you just referenced it, about these kind of cutthroat people, right? They also, as this article says, are incredibly thin-skinned. Like those kinds of people can't handle criticism, which is why they want to be the king. That is why they want to be the most powerful person. And so, it says in the article, quote, "It helps me understand why so many on the right are obsessed with IQ. It can't be that bosses got lucky. It has to be that they are naturally destined to rule." And of course, that makes someone with incredible insecurity and who has thin skin feel like, this was my destiny. I am obviously better than everyone. This is where I should be. And it made me think of the quote. It's from Stephen Jay Gould. "I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops." And I've always loved that quote because it is fact and the antithesis to this bullshit. Like, are you kidding? Do you really think you were just destined to be? You had all this tailwind to ride you to where you are now, and you don't see it. And this is a reference to Jay's analogy about white privilege from many, many years ago, talking about being on a bicycle and being in the headwind versus the tailwind. And when you're in the tailwind, you don't know you're in a tailwind. You're just flying and thinking, geez, I'm going really fast. I must be really strong. I must be really great. Like, that is what that is.
Living rent free in my head is the clip of Elon Musk calling Tim Walsh a jerk.
Oh God, and saying we
Like,
should all
literally
be sad for him. Yeah.
What a jerk.
Yeah.
Just, yeah. Because I mean, it's exactly what you referenced. It's the thin-skinnedness of someone and like completely disconnected from the evil, awful things that you're actively participating in. The power dynamic, yes, there is a power dynamic between Tim Walsh and Elon Musk. Financially alone, there is a huge power dynamic. But we're just going to act like Tim Walsh is the bully, right? Like he's the bad. He literally used the word evil.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
Well, we're concluding the show today with a conversation about someone who very much believes in running government well and for the benefit of the people. I teased at the beginning, we were going to talk about a little known quote from FDR and his idea of what to do with a birch rod you keep in the cupboard, kept there to beat children, metaphorically in this case. I want to start, though, with some classic FDR quotes, like just to warm up.
"The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little."
And
These economic royalists complain that we seek to overthrow the institutions of America. What they really complain of is that we seek to take away their power.
And
We know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
Sing.
And I gotta say, I got on a little bit of a roll today, so I have more. I just don't have clips of them. But it turns out he said a lot of stuff that's very relevant to today, which reminds me of his vice president, who we talked about in a previous episode, and how accurately he described fascism. And we concluded that it's because the way it looked 100 years ago is exactly how it looks now, which is why he says a bunch of stuff that rings so true today. So, just a few examples. He says, repetition does not transform a lie into truth. Yeah. This one I found surprising for the time. He said, men and nature must work hand in hand. The throwing out of balance of the resources of nature throws out of balance also the lives of men. I was proud of him for that one.
Mm-hmm.
Human kindness has never weakened the stamina or softened the fiber of a free people. A nation does not have to be cruel to be tough, which I appreciated. We must scrupulously guard the civil rights and civil liberties of all our citizens, whatever their background. We must remember that any oppression, any injustice, any hatred is a wedge designed to attack our civilization. Of course, he gave his 4 freedoms speech, advocating for the freedom of speech, of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. He, getting a little close to home with our conversation today, we must especially beware of that small group of selfish men who would clip the wings of the American eagle in order to feather their own nests, which is a visual I appreciate. Amanda, you said zing already. That's the note I made for this one. I am neither bitter nor cynical, but I do wish there was less immaturity in political thinking. That is a 1930s zing if I've ever heard one. This one, I mean, who was he talking about when he said, never underestimate a man who overestimates himself?
That hits.
That's a thinker. Yeah.
I think that should be on Musk's tombstone someday.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them. This one I liked. When you see a rattlesnake poised to strike, you do not wait until he has struck to crush him. I would direct like Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell, who apparently has expressed regret about not voting to impeach Trump. And then let's see, this is the last one. And again, this is hitting too close to home. More striking still, it appeared that if the process of concentration goes on at the same rate, at the end of another century, we shall have all American industry controlled by a dozen corporations and run by perhaps 100 men. Put plainly, we are steering a steady course toward economic oligarchy.
Good thing we turned it around, right?
Right.
So the point is, FDR had lots of good things to say. You know, we don't deify the guy or think like he would be perfect for our current times, but he had a lot of good things to say and a lot of good energy that we could benefit from sort of recapturing. So this story that we're bringing up today, you know, I said that it's one of his lesser known quotes. And the reasons why it is not as well known is because the quote about the birch rod in the cupboard came from a relatively obscure campaign speech while he was still governor of New York. And then also he was talking about a relatively obscure but very important regulatory policy that we don't care to think about these days. So as electrification was spreading across the country, monopolists had conspired to make their utility monopolies legitimate by arguing that they were natural monopolies due to the nature of how electricity generation and distribution actually works in the real world. Or like, it doesn't make sense to have competition in a utility scenario. And so we need to be monopolies. But look, we'll throw you a bone, people and government, set up regulatory agencies to oversee our businesses and then let us continue to be monopolies. That's the deal. And then, of course, they promptly captured those agencies, a practice which is still alive and well today. So FDR was making the case against these monopolies and saying that people should always have the right to vote to replace private industry with a publicly run option in the utility sector. And often, he argued, just the threat of that would be enough to keep the private industry basically in line. But he also stressed the importance of regulatory agencies not being lulled into the idea, captured entirely, or lulled into the idea that they should just be these sort of neutral arbiters between industry and the people. He's like, no. I staunchly believe that the regulatory industries need to be very much on the side of the people, guarding against corporate overreach and greed, because of course that's what the corporations are going to do. And so the agencies need to be really clear about who they're there to represent. So he says, quote, "The Public Service Commission is not a mere arbiter as between the people and the public utilities, but must act as agent of the public upon its own initiative as well as upon petition. The regulating commission, my friends, must be a tribune of the people, engaged in positive and active protection of the people against private greed." So you get a sense of where he's coming from. He's arguing that the government is the bulwark against greed. This is the antithesis of the idea that government should be run like a corporation or captured by them or inhabited by billionaires with their own interests, because of course those people are always going to have their own interests that are not at all aligned with the people. And seeing that clearly is paramount. It's something that doesn't get talked about enough. It doesn't get taught enough. We are so far away from the age of antitrust legislation and trust busting that we don't see clearly the need to completely disaggregate government from corporations, because they are fundamentally opposed to each other and should be. So we are in this situation where government has been dragged down, very intentionally, by the Republican Party, which has done everything in its power to throw sand in the gears of government so that it doesn't work, so that they can point to the government not working as an argument to dismantle it entirely. And then on the flip side, people actually interact with corporations on a regular basis and have plenty of bad experiences with them, but, also enjoy, whatever, their smartphone that they think is kind of neat. And yeah, I guess corporations are okay.
Saying the government is a bulwark against greed and that these agencies should work on behalf of the people. I think he says as an agent of the public, which I just really like that phrasing. It's very strong. And that's really it, right? Like, it's a protector of the people from being taken advantage of. That's really what it is. And people lose sight of that. They don't think the government is working on their behalf to protect them. But so many of our agencies came into existence for that very purpose. And so why do corporations and, Trump and Musk want to tear down the government to the studs? Because they want to take advantage of people without consequence. Like, that is totally the game. Trump already has. He's just been in lawsuits over it for decades. And Musk has lawsuits too about his companies. They want to screw you over. They want to rip us off because we're sitting ducks without the government on our side. And let's be clear, the government's not on the people's side anymore. So look out.
Well, yes, not anymore entirely. But remember, Amanda, you and I went to one of the Bernie and AOC anti-oligarchy tours, and one of the speakers, who was not a famous person, was had he been fired? I guess he maybe had been fired and was fighting against it. But he worked for the FTC, and he gave this fire-breathing speech about the power of the FTC to protect people against corporate oligarchy. And he talked about the attempted merger between two gigantic grocery chains and how the FTC sued to stop that merger on behalf of the people. And I was like, wow, I can't believe someone who you imagine to be just like a nerdy bureaucrat working at the Federal Trade Commission to give a, as I said, fire-breathing speech about the power and value of government to work on behalf of the people.
As defenders of the people. And that is what we have lost. We have lost understanding. If you ask anybody today, what does the FTC do for you? They wouldn't be able to tell you. That's what we've lost. And it's ripe for exploitation because of that.
I think we've also lost the ability to tell that story in a broad, appealing way, because the reason why governments get taken over and the regulatory agencies get corrupted is because bribery works. Like, money works. The idea that, well, now I have more money, money's better. And we don't have stories that lift up the fired FTC agent and show you that wealth and opulence aren't good things. We actually have the opposite. Like, wealth is the goal. Like, being rich is the goal of American life. Almost full stop now. I feel like people, when FDR was speaking, would have understood The Great Gatsby as a cautionary tale about the emptiness of chasing wealth and fame and losing yourself and not being a person anymore that you can recognize. Whereas today, like, you got the Leo DiCaprio movie version where, like, I mean, he borderline just rides off into the sunset. Like, hey, it's Leo. Like, he's rich. I want to be like him. We don't have the media literacy or the stories to tell that make doing that job by itself meaningful, important, and valued. Whereas there are still people who, without knowing too much about Elon, I would assume, but think of him as something to look up to, as a person. I want to be like Elon. Whereas if we had better storytelling ability, we could tell that he's the most miserable man on planet Earth. He is the richest and the saddest at the same time. So maybe there's a correlation there, and maybe we could make the connection better for people to realize that doing your job well, doing your job for others, doing things for other people is more important than selfish accumulation of wealth. I don't know how we get there. I don't know where we go, because it seems like the culture has gone to fuck you, get mine as the ethos. And it doesn't end well. None of those people actually end up happy. And I think somehow, some way, we have to convey that.
Just quick point of order. Leo does die in the end, and he is pretty sad. I take a little issue with the framing of that movie.
But he's a tragic hero. Like, he's Leo, right?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm a big fan of The Great Gatsby, the book. And so maybe I put more context on the movie than it actually has.
I was about to say.
They should not have cast Leo.
Yeah. Glamorizing it. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. We can talk offline.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was just thinking, like, I like the curation of these articles because I know we framed it in the way of talking about authoritarianism and giving way to that. But I also think it tells a story of people's subjugation and, like, accepting it. So I grew up Catholic, and yes, there's unique things about every religion, but one of the things about Catholics is you do not get a direct line to God, to Jesus, to whoever. There are levels that you have to go through in order to talk to the omniscient presence, whatever. So I was thinking in that, like, you know your place in the religion. Like, you know that you are less than. And you know that there's a hierarchy of people who are closer and of God who can kind of make those leaps, right? And then to take it to business, I do think that a lot of us don't have access to our CEO. We don't have access to our board. There's so much middle management before you ever get to anyone who actually has power within the business that we kind of accept. And, like, there's a little cloud of murkiness around what they actually do and why they're in the position that they are, that we accept that they must be greater than. And what I want in, like, listening to FDR is, like, liberation for our people. And when I say for our people, talking about Americans, I guess. I want us to realize that we do have the power. Like, it's actually scary how much power we have when we recognize it and when we wield it together. But, like, with FDR, you know, I had a thought of, who's our FDR? Is it Bernie? Like, is that
J.B. Pritzker.
You know, back in 2016. So back in 2016, you know, I was thinking Bernie, like, Bernie's our FDR. And then I realized there's not a perfect figure. There's not going to be the FDR who comes in and they have all these great moral compasses.
We don't need a savior, right, Erin?
Yeah, we don't need a savior. And it's so hard to get out of that thinking. But it is going to take us pushing and applying pressure, consistent pressure, going back, practicing democracy, which is fucking hard. It is hard when you're working your job. Participating in democracy, it's not a designated time slot in your schedule for you to go out and do this. So it takes a lot of work. But in that, we do have the power. And I do want people to recognize it. And I want them to be liberated. And I want us to be a nation of free people, if you will. Because right now, that's not what we are. Not even close.
I have several thoughts. First, Erin, be careful with your metaphors because you might have just given bosses around the world the idea that they're like, oh, am I not just the boss? Am I the Pope? Am I God, actually? Good point, Erin. I also will highlight, Deon, you jumped in, but Deon has been beating the drum for years now that J.B. Pritzker might be our FDR. And as much as I am on board with the we don't need a savior, there's also the reality that we live in a society in which people deify money. And so, unfortunately, do we need a super rich guy who's willing to be a traitor to his class, as FDR was called? Probably. I don't want that to be the case, but probably.
That's how I feel too, Amanda.
I'm not saying long term, not long term, he's not the savior, but I am saying what made FDR so formidable is his fuck you money.
Right.
They couldn't bribe him. He believed these things and they couldn't offer him something to not believe these things. J.B. Pritzker, I don't think is exactly the same. I don't think he's as charismatic. He definitely doesn't have as many bars as FDR, apparently. But he does have fuck you money and he is nominally on our side.
Yeah.
And then finally, speaking of being careful with your metaphors, I don't want to leave people hanging any longer. I want to explain the quote that we've been alluding to this whole show. So in the same speech, FDR compared the emerging utility industry with a child of the country. So the country, the people, the government representing the people are the adult. The utility industry is the child. And he says, you will readily see that this, in quotes, lusty younger child of the United States needs to be kept very closely under the watchful eye of its parent, the people of the United States. I'll pause there to point out that, yes, I did have to check on the actual definition of lusty because that evoked some ideas I wasn't sure about. And it does actually just mean healthy and strong, full of vigor. So not in the same realm as lust, the way we think of it today. So not that creepy. And as one does when raising a metaphorical child that will from time to time misbehave, he says, quote, I might call the right of the people to own and operate their own utility something like this: a birch rod in the cupboard to be taken out and used only when the child gets beyond the point where a mere scolding does no good. And, there are a lot of metaphors floating around these days in response to the oligarchy, and a lot of people are jumping straight to the guillotine. And so I'll point out that in that context, a birch rod doesn't sound that harsh.
By comparison. Yeah. So on that note, I think it's worth mentioning in this discussion that corporations do fail, because there is this idea that somehow they're just always going to be totally fine, and that's something to put your faith in. Corporations fail. And who comes to their rescue? The government and your tax dollars. And that is why we know the phrase government bailout as part of our recent political lexicon. So you can argue that we shouldn't have bailed out institutions that failed in big part due to their own greed. Absolutely, obviously. But my point is more to illustrate the divide on government intervention that exists. And so if you weren't conscious during the 2008 Great Recession, which some of our viewers, listeners may not have been, I can give you a pass, but you should probably catch up and go watch The Big Short and Too Big to Fail and all of that. But I'm going to do a quick summary of what happened then, because I think it is important, and it's been long enough now that it doesn't come up as much anymore. So I'm going to be glossing over some things, obviously, because I'm trying to get to a larger point. So there are details here that are not going to be said, but the recession hit during the last year of George W. Bush's administration. Under Bush, with our tax dollars, Congress bailed out the auto industry and the banks. They bailed out the banks with a $700 billion bill called TARP a month before the election. It was a very bipartisan vote. The assessment looking back, though, is that the TARP investment was likely a loss in the end. So probably not the best thing to have done. So end of that year, Obama gets elected, is handed this huge mess. And under Obama, Congress passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, $800 billion in the end, the final count. And that was, of course, aiming to stimulate the economy, get us out of a recession, stop layoffs, encourage hiring, all of that. Not one single Republican in the House voted for that bill. Not one. 3 Republican senators voted for it in the Senate. And that bill was one of the reasons, along with deep-seated racism, that the Tea Party formed and came to be. Because, of course, you should spend $700 billion on bailing out the institutions responsible for the recession and not get a return. But how dare you use the same amount of taxpayer dollars to help people when the private sector has fucked up and left people effectively for dead? And just one last note, economists now overwhelmingly agree on a few things: that the stimulus should have been bigger, it reduced unemployment, and the benefits outweighed the cost, unlike TARP. So we can absolutely argue about the details, and it certainly didn't fix our underlying problems, which is why Occupy Wall Street came to be just a few years later. But it was such a perfect example of how the right has been told the government should stay away unless it's to prop up failing corporations. And they've been told that the government and their own tax dollars are not there to protect real people, even themselves, from those very greedy and, in this case, often predatory corporations. And that is bonkers to me. And it does come from the bullshit mindset that people don't deserve help because there are lazy people out there who might get helped, but corporations are worthy every damn time, no matter what. And that's my screed for today.
When we were talking earlier, I had this image of everybody knows someone in their life that's kind of like a schemer. Like they're always on to the next thing of how they're going to make money. They're like hustling. They're like doing all these things. They just happen to be people who didn't make it. Like all of these corporations and things like that, the people who started them, like they have a little bit of that. They have a little scheminess behind them. And again, I think people don't realize that like you are doing the work. Like I think sometimes people give way, like when you're having those frustrated conversations in a corporation, when you're like deep in it, right? And you're like, what does this middle manager do? They don't know anything about what my process is, blah, blah, blah. But like as a whole, do we talk often about that? That like the workers are the ones who know what is going on in that company. They're the ones with the expertise that the CEO just happens to be benefiting from. Like their expertise isn't actually to do with the business and what the business does, right? It's about like, I don't know, the commanding of people, the like making decisions of
business management.
Yeah. Like, and like you need it a little bit, but like, do we need it at the scale that we prop up? No, like that's just capitalism overwrought. Like that's why we have monopolies. Like we would function probably better if we had more mid-sized businesses. But yeah, I just like can't help but think about these schemers. Like that's what they are. But like we glorify them, we prop them up, and we're like, nah, not them. Like they're the intelligent ones. They're the ones that have it figured out and worked hard for it, right?
That being devious is equal to intelligence somehow.
Yeah.
Every time I hear entrepreneur from now on, I'm going to hear little schemer.
Yeah.
that's just little schemer. I like that.
That should be a comic strip, little schemer.
Well, so just to wrap up the show, I saved one FDR quote for the end because it's a good one to end on. So for all of us intent on continuing to fight back and undo the oligarchy that has formed, not just recently, FDR predicted it 100 years ago. He says, just in general, remember always that all of us, I will note, not Native people, but he doesn't note that all of us are descended from immigrants and revolutionists. So we'll take that and take inspiration from it.
Mm-hmm.
Do we solve the problem today? Keep your birch rod handy.
Keep your birch rod handy. Let's put that on a t-shirt.
Watch out for little schemers.
Yeah, and little ski.
Well, that's who you need the birch rod for.
Yeah.
Yes.
Watch out for them.
Right.
They're lustful.
All right, I'm happy to end on that. I think we solved this one as well as we ever have. So if you have thoughts that you want to add in, you can leave us a message or send us a text to 202-999-3991. Email us to j@bestofleft.com. Message us on Signal @bestofleft.01. Thanks for listening. And remember that this is all really happening, so continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, do what matters most. FDR compared the emerging utility industry with a child. So the country, the people, the government representing the people are the adult. The utility industry is the child. And he says, I might call the right of the people to own and operate their own utility something like this: a birch rod in the cupboard to be taken out and used only when the child gets beyond the point where a mere scolding does no good.
The Puritan shadow still looms today in the temples of greed and gold, where riches define the righteous path and the poor are left in the cold. They preach of heroes to save the land with promises grand and hollow, while power is clenched in a ruthless hand and democracy lies fallow. Keep that birch rod in the cupboard for when scolding does no good. Stand together to face the schemers as our forebears knew we should. When power-hungry titans feather their nests with our eagle's wings, democracy demands we fight for our lives against these would-be kings. Run government like a business, a dictatorship in disguise. The boardroom replaces the ballot box, democracy swept aside. Their libertarian smokescreen hides an authoritarian dream. Their wealth deludes them, we're geniuses, fit to rule the whole regime. When banks fail, they take their bailouts. When people fall, they get the blame. The Tea Party raged about handouts, but the rich set the rules of the game. We're sold myths of superheroes, and the wealthy's claim to power. But that birch rod in the cupboard portends our finest hour. Keep that birch rod in the cupboard for when scolding does no good. Stand together to face the schemers as our forebears knew we should. When power-hungry titans feather their nests with our eagle's wings, democracy demands we fight for our lives against these would-be kings. Against these would-be kings. Against these would-be kings.